Hello, good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. We'll just give it a second. Oh, there he is. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today on this Wednesday morning. My name is Michelle Cardenas, and I'm the Programs Associate with Initiate Justice. We noticed that you all have we saw that you all had a ton of questions regarding our current legislation, and what better person to answer those questions than our policy expert, Greg. With that, I will pass it to you.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. Thank you for setting this up and for being here. So hello, everyone. My name is Greg. I'm the policy manager for Initiate Justice. I'm in charge of our legislative campaigns in Sacramento. It's a really busy time of year for us, right? So next Friday, June 4th, is the deadline for bills to clear their House of Origin. So this year, we're only working on Assembly bills, ABs. So the ABs have until next Friday to get out of the Assembly, or they're not moving forward this year. So for us, we just wanted to have this opportunity to come on here, provide some updates, because big things have happened recently, and just talk about the bills and answer any questions you may have. So Michelle, should I just dive into it, or do you have questions that I should start with?
Yeah, so we thought that a good place to start might be with 256 and 292. Where do we stand with those? What can we expect next?
Yeah, certainly. So AB 256 is known as the Racial Justice Act for All. It's with Assembly Member Ash Kalra. AB 256 cleared the Assembly Appropriations Committee last Thursday. It came off the suspense file. It'll be brought up on the floor next week. So next Monday is a holiday, but from Tuesday to Friday will be the 3 or 4 days, right, to get your bill past the Assembly. So look for some calls to actions and some items around making calls, sending emails, using social media toolkits, things like that for 256 next week. The California Racial Justice Act for All is extending protections that were passed with the bill last year, AB 2542, also for Mr. Kalra, known as the original Racial Justice Act, right? That just bars the state from using any racial bias or discrimination to secure somebody's conviction. So tangibly, right, that can look like racist or discriminatory statements from judge, prosecutor, expert witness, and it can also be proved through disparate racial sentencing practices. So the Racial Justice Act, right, this is the retroactive 2.0 version, AB 256. It truly is like a groundbreaking civil rights piece of legislation. I know we always like to say every bill is like a landmark bill, but this one truly is. And AB 256 is going to offer a lot of ability for potentially a lot of folks in prison, right, to file a petition and get back to court if they can prove, right, all these necessary steps under the Racial Justice Act to potentially have a retrial or a resentencing. So again, AB 256 is going to the Assembly floor next week. So we'll probably post some like a target list with call your member, call things like that really, really soon. But that'll be a really big step for that bill. The next bill, AB 292, with Assemblymember Mark Stone, is what we're calling the Access to Programming Act, right? So this bill is related to rehabilitative in-prison programming and the credits that folks can earn for completing such programs. That bill similarly is kind of in the same place, right? It cleared the Assembly Appropriations Committee last week, came off the suspense file last Thursday, and it'll actually be going to the floor tomorrow. So Thursday, May 27th is going to be the day for us for AB 292 to come up on the floor. The floor session tomorrow in the Assembly starts at 1 p.m. And I believe AB 292 is the file order 93 or so. So it may be middle of the afternoon or towards later in the day where AB 292 is heard. But, if you follow Initiate Justice on social media, we've been posting these graphics, right, with all the target Assembly members that, who support that we need, right, in order for AB 292 to get across the finish line here, get us to 41 votes and get out of the Assembly. And I think just zooming out a little bit, right, the legislative process is, it's 9 or 10 months. It takes a long time. There's all these steps you have to go through. But the Assembly floor in many cases is the most difficult steps, or the most difficult step for us when we're doing this criminal justice reform work and trying to end mass incarceration. just the political center, right, of the assembly is leaning more towards the mods and to the progressives. And so when the mods have like the power base, you have to like go through them, right, in order to pass your bills. And so our list on AB 292 for our target assembly member are a lot of folks who have not yet committed to supporting the bill, but if they get a lot of calls from their constituents and we can just build like a lot of momentum in that direction, it puts us in a really good place for tomorrow. So for tomorrow, AB 292, our big programming bill. This has been like 2 years in the making for us, right? We had an identical version of the bill last year, AB 3160. So again, we just feel like it's very, very important for accountability reasons, for oversight, just ensuring that programming is actually going to be offered inside the prisons, and people don't have to, be on a wait list for 2 years, 3 years just to get into some of these self-help groups, and that we should be prioritizing these programs and just the rehabilitative opportunities. But AB 292 definitely needs your like immediate help. So if you go to our page, you can see our graphic. We have the phone numbers listed for you. If you don't know who your rep is, we have a link and a video from my colleague Michelle made here for how to make these calls. But definitely need like all hands on deck right now for AB 292.
Right, thank you, Greg. As for someone who has never made these calls before, can you give them quick advice or what they can expect when calling their assembly members?
Yeah, that's a great question. It'll be like a 10-second conversation, right? Like you honestly, like you call them, say, hey, my name is Greg. I'm a constituent of assembly member, Bob Smith. My zip code, I like to just give them my zip code in case they may ask for it. I tell them my zip code, I don't even know my zip code, 91406, something like that. And then just I support AB 292, and I urge the member to do as well on the floor, right? And that's it, right? Like it really is just like a very simple thing. I've never had a call where they ask you, well, why do you support this? Or why do you think it's important? It really is just like, tell them you support AB 292. They say, thank you. They make a note and they like try to get off the phone as soon as possible because they're busy people. So it is a very, very simple, easy, stress-free phone call type of conversation, but you can watch my colleague Michelle's video to break it down to let you know how it actually goes.
Right, yeah. And what about for the people whose assembly members aren't on our target list? Should they still be calling or should we hold off on that?
That's a really good question. So I think it depends if you know like the voting history of your assembly member. So for example, right, if your assembly member is Mark Stone, he's the author of AB 292, so you don't need to call him. Or, if your assembly member is very progressive, you don't need to call them because you already have their support. So I would say it depends, on who your assembly member is. There's a lot of folks who are not listed on this list who, frankly, we think are not gettable, right? So it's not even worth putting them on our list because we think no amount of calls is going to move them. So I would say, yeah, I mean, if you want to call your member, that's fine, but it's not a priority. Like this list of, I think it's 12 or 11 targets here. Those are the folks who were like, we really need to generate a lot of calls into their offices. So I would just prioritize those offices there that you see on our list.
Perfect. Yes, thank you. For those of you asking, yes, this will be recorded and posted on our YouTube page after. We'll send that out to everybody. Another big question that we had was what happened to AB 1509? How can we move forward with that? What are the next steps?
Yes. So there's very disappointing, very sad news with AB 1509. Right. So last week during the suspense file hearing in the Assembly Appropriations Committee, AB 1509 was held in committee, which effectively means that they killed it for this 2-year legislative session. Right. So they, and I'm saying they in like very loose terms here because there's not a lot of, there's no transparency or oversight, or at this point, we don't per se know why it was killed. Right, we can't say, oh, it was definitely this assembly member. It was definitely the governor's office. It was definitely, whatever weighing in. At this point, we don't know. Again, I think the Appropriations Committee is just like offers like the least amount of advocacy and the least amount of transparency for when you're trying to push your bills and try to have these conversations. So AB 1509 was killed, right? It was our big gun enhancement bill. Let's remember Alex Lee. We were seeking to eliminate most gun enhancements and then reduce the 10, 20, 25 to life gun enhancement for violent felonies, violent crimes down to 1, 2, or 3 years, and then allow for resentencing. And so the manner in which the bill was killed, right, in this like very secretive, behind closed doors type of way in the Appropriations Committee, I think it sends a message, right, that they didn't want this bill to move forward, right, and that they were, frankly, again, scared of such a big proposal. Our bill was potentially going to be helping more than 30,000 people who are currently incarcerated, right? The gun enhancements are the first or second most commonly applied of enhancements, depending on, the data that you're looking at. And of those 30,000 plus people, right, 89% of people who have these gun enhancements are people of color, right? So, put another way, right, you have these gun enhancements, right, and 9 times out of 10, they're only being applied to defendants of color in the courtrooms. When there's no data to suggest, right, that only people of color are using guns, or, white people are not, or whatever, it's just because of systemic racism, implicit bias, all these things. Prosecutors have been, for the past 30, 40 years, building mass incarceration by choosing to overcharge and over-sentence people of color, which is why we call it the Anti-Racism Sentencing Reform Act. And so I don't want to get on here and speculate too much, right? Because again, we don't have all the information, and I think it would be irresponsible for me to be naming names or airing anything out until we know for sure. I think the one thing we can say is that Assemblymember Alex Lee is very committed to this bill and to this bill idea, right? He made this one of his biggest priorities this year in the legislative process. And again, 1509 was, one of the biggest bills this year in California. So, we're still in the immediate aftermath of processing what happened. And there's a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of time here to figure out next steps and strategy and, how we can come back stronger next year. But, I think we can use this year as take a lot away from it, learn a lot from the experience, right? I know that's obviously what nobody wants to hear, right? We want to pass this bill. We want to get people home. We want to reunite families. But, in the meantime, this was a bill this big, was probably always going to take a multi-year effort. So we are committed to that long-term vision. Obviously mass incarceration was not built overnight. And so we're not going to dismantle it overnight. But I really do think that we're taking these really big steps. And again, even though AB 1509 was not successful this year, I think it paves the way for us to be smarter. And when we come back next year, because we now know what the opposition is most concerned about, what their number one talking point is against the bill and all these things. And so we can just sort of collect all that when we come back next year and just increase our chances of being successful and of passing this big revolutionary legislation that's, going to help us end mass incarceration in California. But we have to go after the sentence enhancements, right, if we're going to end this system, and it has to be retroactive, right? Because what's the point of passing these bills if it's not going to help people inside? So very, very committed to this bill and to this idea. Unfortunately, it's not moving forward this year, but that does, we will be back next year. We will be back in the future, and we will continue to push these big, big ideas that are going to be able to end this system.
Right, thank you. Another question that I'm seeing in the chat is, will AB 1509 be reintroduced again by IJ, by the same assembly member, or will we see changes in that?
That's a really good question. So the answer is yes, but with some caveats, right? So there's some legal doctrines that I don't fully understand, but you can't introduce an identical bill in back-to-back years if it was held in committee the way AB 1509 was. So I don't believe Mr. Lee can just rewrite the same exact bill and then bring it back next year. So I think he is not allowed to reintroduce this bill until the next legislative session starts in 2023. But I do not think that precludes another assembly member or senator from introducing a similar idea next year and trying to run with it. But that's all a lot of strategy that we, frankly, haven't even got to yet in terms of figuring out, how we're going to bring it back, who's going to champion it, who's going to be leading it. I also want to give a shout out to the other co-sponsors, because it wasn't just Initiate Justice who was pushing this bill. We also had an SC Justice Center, or just SC Justice Group, I apologize. Silicon Valley Debug and Restore Justice were the 4 groups here coming together to help us push this bill. So I think that coalition is going to hopefully remain intact, right? And maybe we build more, we bring other people in, and we just come back, again, smarter and stronger next year. But it's too early to say who the author is going to be and what it's going to look like. But I can, commit that it will be back. It just might be in a slightly different form and with a different author, but we're not walking away from this idea just because 1509 didn't work.
Right, thank you. Will we know why 1509 didn't pass? Is that something that would be made public? Will we ever find out?
It's a good question. I think we'll know at one point, right? I don't know the timeline on that for sure, right? I think The author, Assembly Member Alex Lee, he can have some conversations, right, with, the chair of the Appropriations Committee. So Assembly Member Lorena Gonzalez is the chair of the Approps Committee. She can, she's the person, right, who knows why it was held. To this point, we can only speculate as to why. Maybe there were pressures on her to do it, or maybe it came from the governor's office or somewhere else. But I know the Assembly member is going to be having those conversations. Again, it's just like a very busy next 2 weeks, right, until June 4th to get your bills out of the House of Origin, out of the Assembly, or out of the Senate. So I think over the next 2 weeks, I don't think we'll have clarity, but I think after that, there will be some conversations, right, with the member and some other people, and we can maybe get some more insights. But I think it's really important, obviously, to know why it was killed, so that we can maneuver around that, work through those concerns when we come back next year, so that we don't just run into the same roadblock, in the future when we bring this bill back.
Right. Is there another bill currently in the works that mirrors 1509?
In the works, like in terms of like this year, no. This was the only bill, right, that was going to be focused on firearm enhancements, really going after some of these things. There's a lot of other really great bills this year that are still moving forward, right? But none of them have the same intent or spirit of 1509 in the sense of like literally going after the gang enhancements, reducing all this time, allowing for retroactive relief. But going forward, next year, 2022, 2023, or, in the future, it will be back in that pure form of, that same idea of getting people free and of getting a lot of these laws off the books.
Right. Another question that I am seeing and that we've gotten a lot as staff, what should we be telling our incarcerated loved ones? What's the accurate information? What message?
Yeah, so the accurate information is that 1509 is dead for this year and it will not be moving forward. And so I think you give that information to people and they do with that truth, whatever they need to process that and for, their own internal way of, getting bad news and working through those things. But I think it's really important that we're not selling people like a false dream or a false hope. 1509 is just dead in the ground. We should just consider it a moot thing in terms of moving forward this year. But you can, commit to people that like IJ will be back with a similar bill next year, and we'll be back stronger, better, and smarter in the future. So it's not moving forward this year, but it will be back in subsequent years. And I do believe we'll be successful, right? Again, I think we learned so much this year that's just going to make it easier in the future. So not moving forward this year, but wait till next year, these next couple of years, we're just going to keep pushing until we get it through.
Right. Can you talk about how Senate bill is similar to 1509? I know there was some confusion with that.
SB 81?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. So SB 81 is a bill from Senator Nancy Skinner. It's related to judicial discretion for striking enhancements in sentencing. That bill is not retroactive. So nobody in prison is going to see relief or resentencing under SB 81. I believe it's a good bill, right? It's just going to help judges. So it basically says, right, if like it lists about like 9 or 10 factors. So and if any of those factors are present, it directs the judges to strike the enhancement at sentencing, right? So for example, it says that if the application of this enhancement will lead to a sentence of 20 or more years, don't use the enhancement, right? Don't let the prosecutors overcharge the enhancement. So it just gives more room for the judges to be flexible in striking some of these enhancements. So whether, gun, gang, whatever it may be. But again, it's not retroactive. And so the effect it's going to have going forward, right, will be substantial. It's also important to note that that's one of the ideas that came from the Penal Code Revision Committee as like one of their expert recommendations for 2021. But that bill is not retroactive. So I think that's probably the most important thing to be relaying to people on the inside. And to your point, there is a lot of buzz right now about SB 81, right? But it's just not something that's going to help people on the inside, unfortunately.
Right. Going back to 1509, is there something we might need to compromise, maybe increasing the 1, 2, 3 year to higher numbers, or is it too early to tell?
Yeah, I would say A, it's too early to tell, but B, it's also like, we just have to be like very careful about those decisions, right? Because like, if we do pass a future version of 1509 that just reduces it from 1020 life down to like, I don't know, some other arbitrary number, it would become really hard in the future to come back the following year and then reduce it back down to 1, 2, or 3, right? Like as we learn and as we do this work, right, it's really hard to change laws and to craft new ones. So you just want to be really careful with the stuff you're going to put into writing and the things you're going to put your efforts behind. So My preference would, obviously not to be to compromise on the years. I know a lot of discussion that went into 1509 was, is that feasible, right? I mean, are we going to have the, requisite political support to pass this bill if it is only 1, 2, or 3 year enhancement? So I think in the future, we'll have to decide. I do think, like, unfortunately, right, like the more years we give them for the enhancement, it probably increases the likelihood of the bill passing. But I do think there is like a point in the sand where it feels like it's not something I want my name attached to, or, IJ's name attached to. If we're just giving people 20 years instead of 25, like that doesn't really seem like a big win to me. But, I think the version of 1509 that'll be back in the future will have to address some of those concerns. But I just think there's like a way to go about that I think, we'll definitely have in mind, just to ensure that it still feels like a really powerful bill and a really meaningful one.
Right. Does AB 256 include gang enhancements? How are those two related?
That's an interesting question. So I believe yes. I'm gonna have to do some more research. Basically, under AB 256, right, there's like 4 mechanisms for challenging racial discrimination in your case. And one of them is if you can show racially disparate sentencing practices, right? So obviously, gang enhancements, right? It's something like 95% of people who have them are people of color, which is overt racial discrimination and systemic racism. So it would be on, the petitioner, the person who's in prison, would have to file this back in the court where they were convicted to say, hey, I had this gang enhancement. It was applied in this racially discriminatory way because in this county, X% of people get the gang enhancement who are people of color, whoever, this or that. And then it would be on the judge to weigh that. So I don't know if that would be like the most powerful way to use the RJA to get back into court. But I believe that would be something that would be like finessable, if that's a word, or maneuverable. But I would need to do some more research and get back to you on that one.
Thank you. How can we keep the momentum going on our bill, specifically for one like 1509 that is no longer moving forward? How can we keep that conversation going?
Yeah, again, that's a really, really great question. And I think that's something that we're honestly like still trying to figure out, right? So I think, I'm in the Initiate Justice office right now. We just have like boxes and boxes of letters. I'll just show you. I have like letters of support for 1509 from the inside, right? We're going to be collecting thousands of these letters. So, each one of these stories, right, or each one of these letters has like stories, testimonials of people about why, this bill is important to them. And it really is just the stories of mass incarceration with these letters. So I think we can be very strategic about how we use those letters, right? And I think it for me, that's like part of like the larger point is that like, it's just like more of like humanizing and like storytelling around this bill, right? Because legislators, they see thousands of bills, right? They have to vote on hundreds of bills, almost every day now. So how can we make 1509 stand out? How can we put a face behind this bill? And I think it's primarily through these stories. So I think one, it's like we should continue to collect these stories, continue to have all these boxes of letters. And maybe we send that to the legislature, or, we continue to do events like this and just keep talking about it. And I think very generally, right, we just talk about sentence enhancements and we don't compromise on our demands, right, that we should end enhancements or anything like that. I think you keep the political pressure up. I think like zooming out a little bit is like you also like have to like show support for those who are also on board with ending enhancements. Right. So obviously the author of AB 1509, Assemblymember Alex Lee, really, took a big risk with this bill and authoring it and stuff. So we have to have his back. We have to make sure that those who are in positions of power who do agree with us, right? Like feel like they do want to move forward with that. They still want to be accountable to all these things and all these bills. And for those people who are in positions of power who do not support this, we got to keep the pressure up on them in the district and just, I think, just culture change in general. Right. I mean, I think the most helpful thing would be like changing the political climate like around this bill so that it's not controversial to end sentence enhancements. Right. Because like right now we go to Sacramento, we work on these bills. They tell us, oh, man, that's too big. That's too crazy. What are you guys talking about? Right. But if we can like flip that like premise. Right. So it's like, oh, like I have to support this because this is what my constituents want back in my district. Right. And I think that's like a longer term goal, and can maybe have like different benchmarks to like measure that. But I just think like the culture change is like the larger move, right? Is that as long as these legislators feel like they don't have support to vote on bills like 1509, they're not going to, right? But if they feel like they can't afford not to vote on these bills, then they will. And I just think that's going to like, expedite like our larger timeline, right, for ending mass incarceration, is just building up that support on the local political level. But again, that's a longer term thing. And I think for now, we just don't be silent. We just keep talking about 1509. And there's a lot of things that we'll like brainstorm and probably have future events and like things like that in the future. But I just think another way is to join Initiate Justice if you're not already a member. If you don't come to our meetings, that's where we talk about strategy and, like the big, grand design and master plan. So just like stay involved with us, right? Because we are going to be back, and it's just going to take these next months, right, to, figure out the strategy for being successful next year and in the future.
Right. We do have a few folks in the chat asking how their loved one can send in a letter of support for 1509, or how can they submit one as well. Would you have advice on how to do that? Maybe they can submit one for the other bills instead.
Oh, yeah, sure. So if you go to our website, right, there's a link to sign up your incarcerated loved one to receive Initiate Justice materials. And when they receive our magazine, it has those templates I was showing you all, right, that are blank, and they just fill it out, send it back to us. And then we take them, either scan them or physically send them up to the Capitol to get entered into the formal record. So just as I asked like y'all out here, right, to join IJ, make sure, your loved ones in prison are doing the same thing, right? They stay up to date with our work and they get the updates that way. I think the link is on our website. I don't know off the top of my head, right? It's probably like join us or something like that, but just go to our website. It should be pretty obvious how to sign people up, and then they will receive all the material.
Right. Yes, you can also find that through the link in our bio. You can sign up yourself and your incarcerated loved ones. Is it possible to sign a petition and get AB 1509 on the ballot, or even signing some type of petition to get rid of the enhancement itself? A lot of people want to bring it to the ballot. Is that possible?
That's a really interesting question. Yeah, I mean, you could put anything on the ballot, right? I mean, we see special interests like Uber and Lyft who spend $220 million to get Prop 22 on the ballot. So if you have unlimited resources, you could recall the governor, you could get anything you want on the ballot. I think that just some like strategy questions around that is like, and again, related to like the culture change stuff that I was talking about, right? Like bringing something to the ballot obviously takes a multi-year effort, takes a lot of funding and resources, but you're going to want to be sure, right, that it's like going to pass before you like invest so heavily in that process. I know obviously we're coming off amazing success last November with Prop 17, with Prop 20 getting laughed off the ballot, right, by 10 million Californians. So I think, looking towards 2022 or in the future, we're going to repeal 3 strikes, and we're going to do all these things that put us towards a position of, ending LWOP, ending the death penalty, maybe doing like a sentencing cap of like 20 years, things like that. So I think we're like all laying the foundation for moving in that direction. And I think just like getting a little bit more into the weeds here. And so sorry if I go like full like policy wonk mode and like lose people, but 1509 is related to firearm enhancements, right? And so there's like over 150 sentence enhancements in the penal code sections, right? And so many of these things were approved by the voters, right, in the 80s and the 90s. So for example, the gang enhancements, right? It was approved by the voters in 88. 3 strikes is another type of enhancement that was approved by the voters. So anything that was approved by the voters, with some exceptions, but we'll just say that as like a rule, right? If the voters approved it, they have to disapprove it, right? So anything that was approved by the voters, like gang enhancements, would have to go to the ballot to get fully abolished and, fully retroactive relief and all things like that. Very interestingly for our purposes with 1509, right, is that gun enhancements were not approved by the voters. This was something that was approved by the legislature in 1997, right? So since it was a statute in 97, we can just write a bill to undo that. And the benefits of that, right, is that in the assembly, it would be a simple majority bill. So you only need 41 votes, and then you would only need 21 votes in the Senate, and the governor signs it, and then boom, you've ended gun enhancements. So like if you just like kind of like compare like the two processes, it's like, to me at least, it feels a lot faster, right? To just do a bill, get yourself 41 votes, get out of the assembly, get it through the rest of the process, get it signed by the governor, and then you've ended gun enhancements versus waiting. You can only go to the ballot every 2 years. There's only two ways to get something on the ballot: through, collecting signatures or going through the legislature. Going through the legislature, would require a 2/3 vote and things like that, become very like politically, I think, unrealistic, right? I mean, if we couldn't, if we don't have the support for 41 votes for 1509, I don't think we would have the votes for 2/3 vote, right, to get it past the legislature in that way. So I think the answer is yes, anything can go to the ballot. The question is just like around strategy and if that like makes the most sense. And I'm not sure it makes the most sense for the gun enhancements, but they may, like, if the legislators just continue to like stonewall us and not support big bills to end gun enhancements, we might have to just write this bill that ends all enhancements and goes to the ballot and let the Californians weigh in on it. Because I do believe the people of California are a lot more progressive than their elected officials in Sacramento for a whole host of reasons. And if we want to talk about respecting the will of the voters, which is a Republican talking point, a lot of other things, they've left Prop 20 off the ballot, right? Like, that's hilarious to me. And I think we should all reflect on that in our advocacy, right? Is that the California voters have been asked to weigh in on criminal justice reform so many times in this past decade. And every time they vote down the tough on crime model, right? And I believe that sends a mandate to Sacramento. Okay, they don't want you to increase penalties. They want you to do things like 1509. They want you to do things to end these enhancements and LWOP, all these things. And it's, you have money in politics and other things that get in the way of that. But I think the systemic reform we're looking for could be accomplished at the ballot. If the legislature just continues to drag their feet and, only prefer these sort of incremental steps. But that's just part of a larger political strategy that, we haven't talked about yet, but if that becomes the move, we would definitely double down on that and invest heavily if needed.
Right. Thank you for that input. Someone wrote, I have friends hoping to stall cases until there's some changes on enhancements. Are there any possibilities of that on the horizon?
I think yes and no, right? I mean, so for example, right, this year there's AB 333 with Senator Comlager. It's a gang enhancement bill, but it's not retroactive, right? So I understand the strategy of stalling it, stalling a petition or whatever until the law changes, but we're moving in that direction, right? Where 333 is not retroactive this year, but maybe in the future they change things and they go to the ballot and they get all these things off. But I think I would need to know the type of enhancement that folks are trying to wait on. If it is for a 1509 gun enhancement thing, the closest we could do, right, is get it reintroduced next year, get it passed, and then people could see relief January 1, 2023. But I'm also not a lawyer, so I don't want to give any bad advice or not even offer any advice. So I think I would need to know more info before I weigh in on that.
Right, thank you. For folks on the call, we do want to leave the last 10 minutes for questions. For specific questions that you would like Greg to answer, please drop them in the chat. But for now, Greg, someone did ask, what can we do as a community to help end mass incarceration?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think one is just on a personal level is just staying motivated and not being deterred by some of these setbacks, and just practicing hope and radical optimism every day. But I think two is just staying involved with IJ and all the other orgs in the space that do great work. There's just a lot of organizations that are putting a lot of effort and resources and time and energy into these bills that will end mass incarceration, will end the system, and a lot of them need grassroots support, and also need donations and things like that. So I would just say folks got to stay plugged in with these orgs that are doing the work. And I think it's also very important for people to start developing relationships with their elected officials in Sacramento. So you want to be able to call your assembly member and say, hi, my name is Michelle. I support AB 1509, and I would really love Ms. Rivas to do as well, right? And you want to be able to pick up the phone and make the call, and they already know who you are, right? They know what your values are. They know you want to end mass incarceration. Because when we ask people, for example, for AB 292 right now, hey, make these calls to these important, to these targets to get their support for the bill, you want to be able to make that call and they already know who you are. So I think on a personal level, right, it's just staying hopeful and everything like that. And then on an organizational level, it's, joining IJ. We have, monthly member meetings, first Wednesday of every month. We have a lot of committees that meet all the time. So just like come plug in with our structure, with our work, and we will talk more about these things and our general strategy and how we can get us to a place where, that becomes realistic over the next decade or so.
Right. Someone in the chat asked, is there truth to CDCR having to release 50,000 incarcerated people by 2025?
No. No, but we will keep pushing him in that direction, and we'll end all these enhancements, and we'll get to that place. I mean, I do believe we'll get to that place in the next couple of years, but that's not like a court mandate or anything like that I'm aware of.
Right. Someone else asked, my husband has a 25 to life sentence. What can I do to help abolish the 3 strikes law?
Oh, okay. So yeah, join the Repeal 3 Strikes initiative, right? That's like I'm talking about, like joining orgs and stuff. We can maybe follow up or put that in the chat later, but there is a movement, right, to get 3 strikes repealed and abolished at the ballot in 2022. And so that effort, again, is going to be 100% grassroots. So you're going to need funding, you're going to need volunteers, you're going to need all these things. So just get plugged in with the people who are already working on that. And they would have all the info and advice about, their strategy and, moving forward and stuff.
Right. Would you briefly describe the changes to credit earning that CDCR recently announced?
Yes, briefly is hard, but so on a couple weeks ago now, it went into 3 weeks now. On May 1st, right? CDCR announced automatic emergency changes to how good conduct credits or good time credits are allocated within the prison system. And so we have an FAQ on our website that could explain all of this better than I will attempt to right now. Because I kind of get confused sometimes with the calculations and the numbers and stuff, but basically it depends on somebody's conviction. So if you're convicted of a nonviolent crime, you'll be able to go to 50% time of good conduct credits. So 1 day in prison, good behavior, 1 day off your sentence for everyone who has a nonviolent felony. And for those who have a violent felony or a violent crime, you'll go from 20% to 33% off, right? So you'll go 1 day or 2 days in prison, good behavior, 1 day off your sentence. Those changes have to be calculated all over again. So people who have a release date that is soon, or people who are closest to the pad, closest to coming home, will receive their new date sooner than those who are further out. And I think they say it's going to take 6 to 8 months for everybody in prison to get their new release date, which is based on these calculations of these changes to good conduct credits. And it works a little bit different for those in fire camp. They'll still be earning their half time, but it's going to be calculated in a slightly different way. So I would encourage people to look up on our website, our FAQ, or also go to CDCR has their own FAQ that they put on it. I hope that was helpful. Again, I apologize if that wasn't clear, but there are big changes to how the good conduct credits are being allocated, and people will start seeing their new dates very, very soon if they haven't already.
Right. Thank you, Greg. One final thing for the people who joined late. Again, what can they take away from this live? Any calls to action that you want to put out, and final update on 1509?
Sure. So for AB 292, please go to our Instagram, our Twitter, our Facebook, and see our target list of assembly members. We really need folks making calls for 292 today and tomorrow. AB 292 is going to be brought up tomorrow on the assembly floor after 1 p.m. So make those calls, call your legislator, call the targets, and just make sure that you support AB 292 and that they understand that you support it, right? And that they need to be representing your values in the Capitol. Similarly for AB 256, look out for a similar call to action next week, right? We're calling legislators maybe as early as Tuesday. Again, for those who joined later, AB 1509 is not moving forward this year. It was held in the Assembly Appropriations Committee. We're still figuring out exactly why and how we plot out our next steps and our general strategy, but just commit to you all, we will be back next year, stronger, better, all these things. Definitely learned a lot this year about 1509 and just gun enhancements and just, guns are a controversial topic, right? So navigating all that was stuff I, was a little bit novice to, but I feel I learned a lot and we'll be back stronger next year. And then I see a question here about Ab965 regulations. That's a really, really great question. We're expecting those to be released later this summer or later this year. and to be implemented. AB 965 will be implemented starting January 1, 2022. So we will, when they open public comment, right, we're going to like mobilize like a very large campaign to submit public comment, all these things. The intent of AB 965, the legislative intent, right, is to apply all credit types to YOPD dates, youth offender parole dates, but CDCR will very likely only try to apply educational merit credits, or not all 5, or they'll just try to like find a way to like, wiggle out of like fully implementing AB 965. But the public comment process will be our time to hold them accountable to the intent of the bill, and to not let them, make this really great bill have like a small impact. But again, stay posted for that. Stay tuned for that, and hopefully that comes out, later this summer or this fall.
Right. Thank you, Greg. Thank you so much, everyone, for asking your questions. We do want to have these more regularly, so please keep an eye out for those. And for folks who want to stay plugged in with our work, we do have our monthly member meetings on the first Wednesday of the month. You can RSVP through the link in our bio. And as always, please, you can DM us questions at any moment and we will answer, and reach out to Greg whenever we need help with those. So again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Greg, for doing this. Also, keep an eye out. The Institute of Impacted Leaders application is now open. We have a post about it. If you are very interested in this type of work, we do encourage you to apply to that as well. But yeah, again, thank you, Greg. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We hope to see you soon.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Take care.